Oh,
Bob's muted.
Bob, you're muted.
There we go. Okay. Hi. Welcome, everybody. I'm Bob Cott. I'm the president of this fly-by-night organization. Our guest speaker tonight is Bob Bell. He's going to be talking about his book, Out of the Limelight into the Sunlight, Birding as Therapy for Chronic Illness. We're going to get to Bob in just a minute. We got to get some club business taken care of. So, as you might see behind me in the photo, there is several trees just loaded with blackbirds. We happened upon this on a back road route home from Tiny Marsh. Quite a number of them. I was quite astounded to see this many, and I took some photos. So the contest, in a nutshell, is a virtual jelly bean jar. The idea being that participants have to count or guess how many blackbirds are in the trees, and how you enter your guess. You enter it into the chat alongside your full name, because we need that. Otherwise, we won't really know who won. And the prize is going to be a copy of Bob's book that he graciously supplied to us. So hopefully that's clear to everybody, and we'll be awarding the prizes right after the Q&A session. And my lovely wife, Sue, who you can't see beside me, she's the judge, and her decision is final. So, I want to let everybody aware that on April 13th at 10 a.m. at the Tiny Marsh Trotter Dyke, we're having Waterfowl Day, or as I prefer to call it, Duck Days. We're gonna, some of you already heard, we're gonna have portable washrooms on site. And we'd really like any of our members that have a scope or binoculars and knowledge of waterfowl, come on out, help us out. Hopefully the birds will be there. It's been a bit of an odd season. A lot of geese and ducks and swans arrived early. And now we've had this pause imposed on us by the weather. So hopefully we're going to still have some waterfowl out there for us to look at. So that's April 13th. That's a Saturday. I want to see you there. Remind everybody that the Marsh is holding their Sweetwater Festival this weekend. It's the single largest event at the Marsh, and it attracts 2,000 to 3,000 people in a single weekend that come from all over Ontario. This is the 34th festival, and our longtime MPFN member, Roger Flint, has been volunteering with the program since 1998, and he's going to be helping people make maple syrup, or at least explain the process. So, all right. Our next meeting is April 18th. Adam Schultz, Where the Falcon Flies, canoeing 3,400 kilometers from Lake Erie to the Arctic. We've had a lot of interest in this. As our first in-person meeting of 2024, and we'd like to sign up some extra people who are willing to bring treats. So if that's something you want to do or you're willing to do, just email me at info@mpfn.xyz, or you can email Ken. I'm taking the liberty of having them email you, Ken, at mpfieldnaturalist@gmail.com. You probably know that the club executive decided that we were going to hold the winter meetings on Zoom. And so far, we've had crummy weather for every one of our meetings. And it looked like we were going to guess this one wrong, but Mother Nature cooperated, or perhaps not. But we've got some fairly nasty, windy, chilly weather out there. And it seems like we're a bit prescient. We guessed this one right, too. So it's nice to be in the comfort of your own home and not have to think about driving out in the blustery winter weather. One other thing I'd like to try and get people to help us out with bluebird trails. Last year, the club helped to install 55 bluebird boxes at Tiny Marsh. We're now looking for volunteers to monitor the breeding success. We've scheduled an information work session for 10 a.m. on April the 14th at the Tiny Marsh Interpretive Center. That's 500 Tiny Floss Town Line. And I'm not sure, David, is that firm, or is that still tentative?
Still tentative. I did reach out to them today, and they're just checking to see that their family haven't scheduled a late Easter get together, but it looks as if it's going to be a go. So
Okay, so David's going to be taking care of that, and I really appreciate all the help he's had in doing this. So if there's any changes, we'll find a way to let you all know. Also, we've got about a dozen or so Bluebird boxes that still need to be installed at Matchadash. It's kind of physical work, pounding the mounting poles into the ground, and being the old geezer that I am, I can't really do that anymore. So if there's any young bucks out there or young lasses who wanna help out with that, let me know and we'll try to schedule a day. I'd like to get this done hopefully by mid-April. I don't know what more to say about that, but that's something I've been working on. Bluebirds have been plentiful this winter. It's a strange thing. A lot of them have overwintered, and I saw one just yesterday in Matchadash in one of the areas we were thinking about putting up bluebird houses. So if you can help me out, please let me know. Again, email me at info@mpfn.xyz. So right after the meeting, we're going to do we're going to have announced the contest winner. And after the Q&A, we'll be doing our traditional wildlife sightings. So if you have anything you want to share with us, please stick around. Or if you just want to see what other people are saying, hang on and we can do that. And we can have a bit more of a chat after the meeting. So that's about all we have to cover right now. I'm going to hand it over to Ken to introduce our speaker. Ken?
Thanks very much, Bob. I think I'll just unpin you, and I'll find Bob Bell and pin him. Let me just find him. There he is. Welcome, Bob. And are you ready to go?
You want me to share my screen?
No, not just yet. I'll say it a few words before you get going. Not very much, though. I find usually our speakers do a great job of telling us all about themselves, so I don't say too much. But I thought we welcome Bob Bell. He's joining us from the Hamilton area, I believe. And he's got a wonderful book he's going to tell us all about. But I thought I'd just read maybe some of you may know the Canadian author Julia Zarankin, who wrote a very popular book called Field Notes from an Unintentional Birder. And Julia wrote this about Bob's book. She says, Bob's Bell, Out of the Limelight and Into the Sunlight, offers the reader a wonderfully engrossing story of personal transformation in the wake of a life upended by a debilitating and enigmatic illness. Although there is no miracle cure for Lyme disease, Bell finds a way to live meaningfully and joyfully by immersing himself in the world of birds. Written with humility and a good dose of humor, Bell's journey is inspiring in the way he embraces a new passion with utter curiosity and reinvents himself with remarkable resilience when life throws him a curveball. That's from Julia Zarankin. Now, just before Bob gets started, she'd love to take your questions. We kind of ask that you put your questions into the chat and we'll deal with them. Oh, we got a problem. Pat's having problems again. Let me just deal with that. Pat, if you're on the meeting, somehow or other you're sharing your screen, which we can't have you doing that. Hopefully you can join the meeting. Anyways, put your questions in the chat. We'll deal with them. Also, keep those guesses on the blackbirds in the chat, and we'll come up with a winner. So with that, I'm going to unpin myself and get Bob to share his screen and start things off.
Okay, thanks, Ken and Julia, for the blurb. Just bear with me here. So is that showing, Ken?
Looks good. Yeah.
Okay, welcome everyone. Really appreciate your attendance. So this is the cover of my book, and I came up with the concept of tying together my new passion for birding with my Lyme disease by having a bird stomping on a giant tick came to me at about 3 o'clock in the morning, which is when I seem to do my best thinking. But I am proud to say my daughter Candace painted the cover, and I think she did a really good job of capturing my concept. And interestingly, I chose a bluebird, and I've never seen so many as this winter around Ancaster. So, so acknowledgements, Ken, for reaching out and inviting me, and all of you for attending. You're going to see, I'd like to illustrate my talks with some of my bird photos I've taken. They're all labeled. They're just, I'm not going to refer to them, maybe a couple. They're just there for your viewing pleasure while I'm talking. So back when I was working, I'd have to give, corporate presentations to shareholders and investors. And my corporate lawyer always said, I had to have a disclaimer, essentially called a forward-looking statement in every presentation, which essentially says you can't believe anything I say is going to come true, and nothing's changed. I'm a geologist and an amateur birder. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not relaying any medical advice. I'm telling you what I experienced and what I took away from it, my understandings. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Sioux in Northern Ontario. My dad was a high school science teacher and vice principal, and I really owe it to Dad. He's the one that instilled in me a total love of all things science, nature, and the outdoors. So not surprising, I ended up taking a career that combined science and the outdoors as a geologist. I worked as a mineral exploration geologist for 35 years all over the world. The map shows some of my adventures. And when I had to retire, thanks to Lyme, I was serving as the CEO of a Toronto Stock Exchange listed mining company. Now, I must say I'm an accidental author. I mean, I initially wrote this book because of my experience with the medical system and their disdain almost for Lyme. It was cathartic for me to get my frustrations out of my system. And then on a whim, I submitted it to a few publishers, and I realized I got very lucky. And, believe me, imposter syndrome is really striking. I came across this cartoon, which really cracked me up. There's a woman supposedly looking at her laptop, but she's probably watching the birds, and they're making fun of her. Judging by the amount of time that she spends staring out the window at us, she's either a very committed ornithologist or a very unfocused writer. And I'm definitely 2 for 2. So when people do find out I have Lyme, almost automatically the first question is, well, where did you get it? And the short answer is, I've got no idea. I'm not aware of having had a tick bite. I have been exposed to many pathogens globally over my career. All I know for sure is when my symptoms began. So why aren't I aware of a tick bite? Well, number one, they can be infectious when they're really tiny at the nymph stage, which is about the size of a poppy seed. And these photos are from Gregor Beck, who's an ornithologist with Birds Canada down in Long Point. And he's gracefully allowed me to use them. So you can just see how small that black-legged tick is. Now, just imagine if that's on your back or somewhere in your body that you can't see, or if you have lots of freckles or moles or age spots like I have, you're not going to see it. Or if your skin tone is darker than my pasty white. So as a result of this, less than 50% of people with Lyme are aware of having had a tick. And then to compound that, of the less than 50% of Lyme patients who did know they had a tick, only half of them get the bullseye rash, the diagnostic bullseye rash. So I have seen figures as low as about 9% of people with Lyme knew they had a tick and knew they had a bullseye rash. So this is one of the big challenges. And part of the problem is Lyme is a complex disease because the ticks don't just pass on the Lyme bacteria, which is called Borrelia. Most Lyme patients get so-called co-infections. And the most common, and I've got both of these, are Babesia, which is a parasite, and Bartonella, which is another bacteria. And each of them more or less presents with their own set of symptoms. And Babesia can affect your lungs and vocal cords. And as I talk, you'll hear I'll get croakier and croakier. And so I kind of wonder, speculate, is the reason every Lyme patient seems to be a little bit unique in the set of symptoms they present, and unique in how long it takes to recover, if at all. Is that based on the ratio of the toxic load, what percentage Babesia versus Borrelia, et cetera? Anyway, that's just a geologist's theory. So when it began, I can't believe now it's been over 10 years. In September 2013, I was just back from a business trip where I'd been all through Southern Africa, where I know I had a bunch of bites of unknown insects or bugs. And then I went out to Saskatchewan. I was at an outdoor wedding, and I know I wandered off into some tall grass. And within a few days of those two trips, I came down with really massive cold chills and a high fever. And I can remember clearly thinking, because I'd had dengue fever. I contracted that in the Brazilian Amazon. And I can remember the infectious disease doctor sort of wagging his finger at me and saying, don't get it again, because the second time around, dengue fever can go hemorrhagic and be fatal. But, dengue fever, called breakbone fever, there's no cure, there's no treatment. It's about 10 days of misery, and then it just goes away. But these chills lasted, a couple of days, and they were gone. So I just totally forgot about them. And it was about a month later that all these bizarre symptoms, which I'll come to in a minute, began. So, in hindsight, that fever and the cold chills, was either the initial onset of Lyme I picked up on one of those two trips, or it was a random infection which triggered latent Lyme. Later, once I did see a Lyme expert doctor, she believed that Lyme could remain dormant in your body for up to 10 years, and a secondary infection could trigger it. So I'll never know, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I've got it. So these bizarre symptoms, the first thing that happened was all of a sudden, every morning when I woke up, the side that I'd been sleeping on stayed asleep. That annoying, numb, tingly a sleep sensation you kind of have to shake out. But then within just a few days, I developed migratory muscle pain, which sounds kind of weird, but my bicep would be throbbing, and then within hours, it would be my tricep, and then hours later, it'd be up in my shoulder. And then over just a span of 2 or 3 weeks, every major body system was being affected. The big one is neurological. And to this day, I've got peripheral neuropathy, pins and needles burning sensation in my hands and my feet. I've got quite a strong tremor. I lose my balance. Sometimes I have to take a quick stutter step to catch my balance. Most frustrating and embarrassing were the cognitive issues. I'll never forget, I could not count out change to buy a newspaper. And I got so frustrated. They kindly called it brain fog, but I sure felt challenged. Very bizarre that you develop this anxiety, especially for loud noises and crowds. I went to Point Pelee this past spring, and 200 people on a prothonotary warbler, and nothing but click, 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 like paparazzi on a red carpet. And I just freaked out. That's not my idea of relaxing birding. And I'd have these wild mood swings, and that is not me. And I call that Raging Bob. Like Raging Bob would come out of nowhere and be cranky for no good reason. I developed a really strong crepitus. I still have it to this day. That's the snap, crackle, and pop in some joints. I've got it in both of my wrists. In my book, I joked that I thought crepitus was a good term because I felt like I was becoming decrepit. Arthritis, I've got it in my neck. The next couple of symptoms, thankfully, are gone. But I could watch a muscle fiber in my arm, for example, just go ding, 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 twitch away and go on for 10 or 15 seconds. And my heart would go out of rhythm. I'd have heart palpitations, which, of course, would really freak me out. I felt like my internal thermostat was broken. I was running hot. I've developed really strong tinnitus. I mean, I estimate it's 85 decibels of 24/7 cicadas in my head, which is not a good thing for birders. It's getting very problematic for me. Thank goodness for Merlin. Real mega fatigue. I'd go to work, and every day around 12 or 1 o'clock, it was just like I hit a wall. And I couldn't wait to get back to my home and sleep for 2 or 3 hours. I was so weak and so off balance, I needed a cane to walk. and I couldn't walk more than a couple hundred meters. So how do you convince a doctor that all these weird symptoms are all related? And Lyme is called the great imitator, and in particular, it mimics the symptoms of a lot of neurological diseases, and in particular, Parkinson's, ALS, and MS. And as an aside, Canada has the highest rate of MS in the world. And the official party line on that is because of our northern latitude, that we don't get enough sunshine, therefore our bodies don't produce enough vitamin D, and apparently low vitamin D is a risk factor for MS. Well, I would argue that there's tens of millions of Europeans living further north than we are and getting less sunshine. We forget how far north Europe is because of the Gulf Stream keeping it warmer than it should be for its latitude. So again, this is my geologist theory, but I wonder if our excessively high rate of MS is actually misdiagnosed Lyme. So here comes the raging Bob part with my frustration and why I wrote the book for myself. When I first had that problem of every morning, everything was asleep and wouldn't wake up, my family doctor said, well, it's just the way you're sleeping. And I can remember looking at him, like at that point I was 58, and I said, no, this is new. I've got some experience at sleeping. This is something different. But at least he did send me to a neurologist and basically checking me out for MS. And he did an MRI in my brain, and I was really relieved to report, and happy to report they found a brain. He did these nerve conduction tests where they basically give you a shock or a lifter, and then they measure how long it takes for the response to go up through your muscles and your nerves. But after that, he literally looked at me with a smirk on his face and did a hand washing motion and said, I'm sorry, you don't have a neurological disease, but expressed no curiosity or interest to know why I had neurological symptoms. So then there were some strange infectious diseases going around at that time. Chikungunya, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, a mosquito-borne illness, was in the Caribbean. I did get myself into one of the top infectious disease doctors in Toronto, or I got a referral to him. But before I saw him, it came back with this statement: I will evaluate Bob for everything but Lyme. So I took a hard pass and said, why waste my time? And then when I ultimately did get my diagnosis, and I'll talk about that in a minute, at a US lab, my family doctor again, here's his comment: well, of course they found you positive. They want your business. Well, enter raging Bob. I mean, what an attitude. He had no idea what he's talking about. The lab has no financial incentive to find you positive or negative, no ulterior motives. It's purely a diagnostic lab. So then he harumphed and said, well, where in the world could you have gotten Lyme? As if it doesn't exist here. So then I thought I had a brainstorm. I thought maybe if I go to a younger doctor, he or she might be more Lyme literate. And here's what she said to me and at this point I was under the care of a US doctor. And of course I wanted to get that back into Canada because it was costing a lot of money. And here's what she said: if you're spending all that money in the States, buyer beware. And I looked at her and I said, if you could spend 2 minutes in this body, you wouldn't be so dismissive. And at least she had the courtesy to blush. So my daughter made me laugh, and she said, Dad, you would have been better off going to a vet, because we do inoculate our dogs. There's a vaccine for dogs. So, you're fighting misdiagnosis, misunderstanding, and essentially mistreatment. Now, I'm happy to say I believe things have really improved in the 10 years since my experience. But you certainly have to be your own medical advocate and don't take no for an answer. Well, here's a picture I want to refer to. These great horned owlets. This is in London, Ontario, and they're just the perfect ultimate Muppet babies. So I got a bit lucky because when these symptoms were all coming on and I had no idea what was going on, I had a friend come over to visit me, and as I was talking and describing it, I could see the wheels turning in her head, and she interrupted me and she said, have you considered Lyme? And it turns out she has another friend with Lyme, and it was sounding similar. So she was the first one to plant the word Lyme in my brain. And that was before I got the infectious disease doctor saying he wouldn't treat me or diagnose me for that. And at the same time, another friend gave me the name of an alternative doctor in Toronto. And, you know, as a scientist, it was all pretty bizarre. And she said, "You're going to think it's weird, but she said, I had a problem for 10 years. The conventional medical system couldn't figure out what was wrong. I went to this guy. He said it's this. I went back to the conventional system, and lo and behold, they confirmed that that's what it was." So he does this weird galvanic skin testing, electrodermal testing. I won't get into the details, but he essentially pulses different frequencies through your body. And each frequency is supposed to be a unique oscillation of different parasites, bacteria, and viruses. You know, I know it sounds bizarre. And he ran 240 frequencies through my body, and I lit up on 6 of them. And they were all strains of the Lyme or the co-infections. And it was funny because the Lyme bacteria is a spirochete, it's spiral shaped. And that may or may not explain why you get these migratory muscle pains, because the bacteria is not just in your bloodstream, it's in your brain and it's in your muscles. And I think they're literally screwing their way through your muscles. Anyway, he's an Australian guy and he mispronounced spirochete and he goes, "It's a spirochete, mate." So there was my first diagnosis. But the lab I referred to is called Igenics. If anybody ever needs the lab, it's in Palo Alto, California, Silicon Valley. It was a fellow that had made a lot of money. I think it was in the .com era. And he went through the very same thing I did. Frustration of weird symptoms, couldn't get a diagnosis, couldn't get treatment, couldn't get respect. And he devoted his money to try to come up with better diagnostic tools. And you know what they do is they detect antibodies. So I had my blood work done. I came back with extremely high reading of antibodies, and my Lyme doctor said that was good. It showed my body was putting up a fight at least. And she's now retired, but Dr. McShane, she was practicing in Plattsburgh, New York, just south of Montreal. At that point, she actually lived in Montreal, but she knew that if she did what she did, she could have lost her medical licenses. Canadian doctors have lost their licenses for prescribing massive doses of antibiotics. So she set up in Plattsburgh. She was like a rock star for Canadians. I think she had 1,500 or so patients when I was going, and about 95% were Canadian. She put me on a very strict diet of no sugar, no starch, no yeast. And that was to make sure I wouldn't suffer any horrible side effects from the antibiotics. And I cycled on and off different antibiotics over a period of between 2 and 3 years. And, you know, finally the day came, she said, "Bob, I think I've done all I can do for you. Where do you think you're at?" And I estimated I was improved about 60% and wasn't good enough to do what I was doing. So I had to retire, and I relocated to Ancaster. And in all my homes over my years, I've always had bird feeders out. So the first thing I did was put up bird feeders. And turns out I got very lucky because I live near the Dundas Valley Conservation Area. And turns out I have a very birdy yard. So just before I get into that, I'll say I still have chronic Lyme. It's officially called post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. And apparently about 10 to 20% of us have that. And it's been really interesting because there's been a lot of comparisons now between chronic Lyme and long COVID. And the Center for Disease Control just last fall finally added Lyme as an infection that can cause chronic symptoms. And I suspect that's because of the long COVID, even though one's a virus, one's a bacteria. And it's really important to figure out, because is my chronic Lyme because I have a persistent infection, in which case maybe I should be taking antibiotics? Or did my antibiotic treatment work, but the Lyme basically drove me into an autoimmune situation? I've got an overamped immune system causing inflammation and pain, in which case you don't want to be taking treatment to kill something that's not there. You want to try to treat the inflammation. So back to being retired, put up my feeders, you know, and being a science guy, I was watching the feeders. I have a desk that looks out in the window, and there was a few birds I wasn't familiar with, being from Northern Ontario, the Carolina wren. and whatnot. So I started researching birds and coming and going and making notes. And I even took a course from Cornell online. And all of a sudden one day it dawned on me that I wasn't doing my usual squirming and shifting and not being able to sit for more than 10 minutes. And I realized, there's something going on by being preoccupied with the birds. So part of that research, I discovered there's this fabulous naturalist club here in Hamilton. I went out on a little outing. I met some great new friends who mentored me. They gave me tips on bins and cameras. So a lot of people like to talk about what their spark bird is that hooked them on birding. I like to think it was that trip was my spark. And so all of a sudden I started to bird and I was experiencing less pain. Now, clearly it's not a cure, but it's a bit of a coping mechanism. And then I try to look back in my previous life as a geologist, and in many ways, birding and mineral exploration are very similar in that they're both a treasure hunt. You're searching for hidden gems. And every now and then you do find gold, like this golden crown kinglet foraging for insects and goldenrod. And you also have to learn, acronyms like, every specialty has their terms and acronyms. And, for geologists, a BIF is a banded iron formation. And here's a beautiful sample from Temagami in my mineral collection, rock collection. But one day I was out birding and some tundra swans flew over, and I heard someone close by to me saying, "Oh, I'm hopeless at taking shots of BIFs." And my head swiveled. I thought, what are you talking about? And then I learned BIF stands for birds in flight. It's no longer a rock term. So then, of course, I had to learn all the new terms like lifer and dipped on it and nice capture. And the ever most annoying expression, "You should have been here 10 minutes ago," or "it was just here." So birding, how do you define it? As we all know, it's very addictive. It can be a compulsion or an obsession. But what I like about it is people come at it from different angles and take different things out of it. And not everybody derives the same pleasure or driver. For some, it's just nothing but pure science. For some, it's an art or recreation or hobby. For some, it's almost a competitive sport with eBird and listing and whatnot, or for some, even a spiritual experience. But I think if you sit back and look at the drivers that get people hooked on birding, you can divide them into two main categories. One is appreciative motivation, and the second is achievement motivation. So appreciative motivation, these are the well-based motivations, like just loving being out in the fresh air and soaking up nature and the outdoors, getting that exercise, bonding with friends when you get a lifer, and that mental calming of being in nature and listening to birds sing. And so I give myself ticks for all of these. So I probably shouldn't say ticks. I give myself checks for all of these. Now, the other half is the achievement is more like the goal setting. And this is like the listers, photographers, people with skill building, citizen scientists, contributions, backyard birding, Christmas bird count, atlasing, posting photos on social media and maintaining a blog. And some of these drive me, but I'm more on the well-meaning side of it. So I apologize, it's a bit corny, but to me, the word birds is an acronym for birding inevitably reduces disease symptoms. I mean, you look at that tufted titmouse, which is over near Cambridge, and you can't help but feel relaxed and happy. So, for me, my main health benefit is the form of mindfulness and mental calming. It gets my mind off my ailing body and helps me cope with my limitations. But I got a lot of things that make me passionate about it. It challenges my sense of observation. It slows me down, requires me to be more patient, waiting for a perfect look or photo. Learning to identify all the species by sight and by song is becoming a challenge for me now. And developing a new skill of photography. I certainly didn't set out to be a bird photographer, but when I first started, there was no Merlin, and so I didn't know what I was looking at. So I take pictures and bring them home, and then research them, figure out what I've seen. But over the time, I started to take a bit of pride in the pictures I was getting. And here's one. I will refer to. I watched this little hummingbird fly in, land on that leaf, and lay down. It just shows you how light they are that it could lay on a leaf. And I assumed it was sleeping. I sent it to Cornell, and they told me that she's sunbathing. So another passion is friends. I never dreamt I could make so many new friends at my age. You know, throughout my life, and I'm going to call that BB, and I don't mean Bob Bell, but for before birding, my friends, and I bet it applies to most of you, your lifetime friends or classmates or next door neighbor kids that you met when you were a child or when you were working, work colleagues. But once you start meeting birders, they come from all walks of life, and you're all bonded by this intense passion. It got me out of my bubble, because for the last 10, 15 years, all I dealt with was geoscientists and lawyers. And so now I've had an opportunity to meet so many people. It's been fabulous. As I've already talked about, you know, I love being in the outdoors and nature and the fresh air. I really like watching birds, and they're just going about their lives, doing their thing. They're just so busy and industrious. I really like the way they demark the seasons and the passage of time. How we go from, you know, spring migration to nesting to, you know, duck season, owl season, and cycle through. And, you know, this is more of a joke graph, but the frequency on the y-axis and the calendar year here, and just a joke that, you know, by the beginning of June, it's no easy to say, you know, here you are, this is spring migration of warblers. You know, and I love that rush of about 3 weeks where every morning when you wake up, you feel like a kid waiting for Santa, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy to all have come overnight. It's so exciting. You know, the one good thing about the pandemic was that bird watching has become birding, and it's become cool. You know, I like the term birding so much more. It's a more serious term. It's more active and less passive, but it's also more inclusive. I mean, there are blind birders that bird by ear, so they're not bird watching, but they're birding. So, you know, hopefully there's nobody wearing a tilly hat here, but it's no longer just a nerdy hobby of old men in tilly hats. It's really gratifying to see so many young people taking it up. And I think a lot of that's got to do with technology. Having the apps and eBird and digicams has made it appealing. You know, I put this in my book. I devoted a whole appendix in my book. I thought, okay, you say you're not interested in birds. I guarantee you use bird expressions every day. So I tried to brainstorm and think of every bird expression I could think of. I'm not going to sit and read them here to you, but that's like an appendix. But, you know, like I say, the best thing that came out of the pandemic was birding. Birding was the fastest growing hobby in the world. There were articles in the New York Times, London, India, Australia, because it didn't matter what your pastime was, even if it was just being a, you know, couch potato watching NFL football, nothing was happening. So people were going for walks around their neighborhood or sitting outside, and all of a sudden noticing the birds. And, you know, and I suspect the birds were probably even a little bit louder because there was less industrial noise, there was less traffic. So a lot of people got hooked during the pandemic. And I think it helped them cope with getting through the pandemic. You know, there are all kinds of science papers and books and anecdotes about nature and birding as being soothing for your calming, for your mental health. I think mine is the first one to really go beyond that and even into physical health. But I'm a really big believer in birding to your birdability and taking out of it what you want and not feeling inferior to the experts. It's not a contest. There's many different types of birding. They don't all require expert knowledge or long, strenuous hikes or expensive gear. If you're sitting watching bird feeders, as far as I'm concerned, you're a birder, or sitting on a park bench and listening to the birds. And, you know, if you do have health issues that you can't leave home, you can watch nest cams or feeder cams online or from around the world 24/7. And I put all kinds of resources like this in my book for beginning birders. Now, my bird ability is that as much as I love my birding friends, I really don't like birding in a crowd. And I've already alluded to that. I far prefer to be either on my own or just with one or two. And a lot of it's got to do with this anxiety that I've developed from the line, that I don't want to be the one to ruin it for everybody. What if they do get tired and need to quit? And if we're carpooling, I don't want to be the one to spoil the party. And like I've already said, I can't stand the big crowds. And I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that I use eBird, but I don't contribute to it. If I had to count birds, it would stress me out and would ruin the hobby. So it's a good thing I'm not competing in your contest there. So just touching on a couple of types of birding, I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I've included this one deliberately because twitching is a British term for. It goes back apparently to the 50s when there was a couple of British birders who would go by motorbike, and the guy in the back was always shivering and twitching. I rarely do it because typically, what do I hear? You should have been here 10 minutes ago. But there's this long-staying Lewis's woodpecker came to a lovely couple's backyard up in Manitoulin Island a year ago. They opened up their yard, and I think the final tally was 299 birders visited them. Lewis's woodpeckers don't have any sexual dimorphism, so you really can't tell the males from the females. But Phyllis, the lady there, some of you may have gone up to see this bird. She was hilarious. She said, well, Bob, it's clearly a male. And I said, well, Phyllis, how can you tell? She said, well, first off, he's lost. So I was laughing, and then she kind of pauses and said, and he didn't stop and ask for directions. So that's that's another example of meeting wonderful people and connecting to people through birds that I never would have had the opportunity to do so. The second thing, type of birding that I really want to talk about that I've really taken up wholeheartedly is this 5MR. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. It's a personal challenge to find as many species as you can within a 5-mile radius of your home. And the concept is for us to try to reduce our carbon footprint instead of driving all over the place chasing birds. Build the databases closer to home and play, areas that may be a bit underbirded. So a friend of mine from up in my home country up in Algoma, Carter Dorst, in the fall of 2019, he put out this challenge for all of Ontario to participate in a 2020 5MR. Well, Carter couldn't have any idea that he couldn't have picked a better year to push birding at home. Because if you're like going to Algonquin or Point Pelee or Rondo or wherever, they were all closed. And the reason I loved it so much was I discovered, for example, a couple of farm ponds and a couple of storm drainage ponds that are tucked away that I had no idea were here. And all of a sudden I was getting all kinds of wading birds and shorebirds and waterfowl that I never dreamt I would get in my 5MR. So it gave me great comfort that as I get older and develop more health issues and I can't travel, it doesn't matter. I can get a great fix right here close to my home in Ancaster. And I'm pretty proud to say that cumulatively now I'm up to 206 species in my 5MR. And I know of at least about 20 that I've missed because I was away, like there was a yellow-breasted chat. And by the time I got back, it was gone. But here's some highlights. Last year in Dundas, we had this immature little blue heron. I've had a cattle egret, a magpie, a black vulture, a Nelson's and Harris's sparrows. Got my whippoorwills just last week. Now the rest on this list might not be such a big deal for you folks, being a little bit further north, but right in my backyard, I've had, both common and hoary redpolls, so I guess they're going to be lumped into one. I've had a flock of evening grosbeaks at my feeder, and just out in the forest quite close to my home, I had both crossbills and pine grosbeak. And just sort of hot off the press 2 days ago, I was looking out and I thought one of these juncos isn't like the others. And there's still a bit of a debate going on amongst all the experts whether this is a straight up Oregon junco subspecies or a Cassiar junco, which apparently is a cross between our slate colored and an Oregon junco. But anyway, very nice bird. It was just here during the snow, lasted about an hour, and I haven't seen it since. But you never know what you're going to see. It's great therapy. You got to keep watching. You wouldn't believe how long it took me to finally get a picture of a chickadee landing on my chickadee ornament in the backyard. But all this talk about birds, I admit I do have an ulterior motive. The more people that I can get interested in birding, it means more people interested in conservation and protection of birds and their habitats and preserving and enlarging our green spaces and green belt and worried about climate change. And that's my segue back to ticks, because climate change is what's really driving this rapid expansion of ticks northwards. Now, these maps are from Public Health Ontario, 2016 left, 2022 right. You can see there's quite an increase between the two, but I dare say both maps probably vastly underreport the reality, particularly the 2016 map. I mean, they're taking it more serious now. But having said that, our cottage, you can see my cursor, our cottage is about here in Algoma, and I was on a trail there last June. I picked up 4 black-legged ticks, so they're all around us. And sadly, our beloved birds are the vector that are carrying the ticks north, and then they fall off, and because of the warmer climate, they can survive. But I hope I'm not fear-mongering. The last thing I want to do is ruin anybody's enjoyment of the outdoors because of a fear of Lyme. Not every bug bite is a tick bite. And I put bug in quotes because, ticks aren't insects, they're arthropods. And not every tick is the deer tick or black-legged tick, and not every deer tick is carrying Lyme. So just sensible precautions, staying on the trails and out of the tall grass. Don't be sitting on the ground or leaning against a tree. Tuck your pants in. I like to wear tall rubber boots. And you can be like this romantic couple when we get back to the cabin. I can't see the caption. You can read it. I've got the bar across the bottom, but you can open the champagne and inspect each other for ticks. And but if you do have one, the clock is ticking. You have to act quickly. That, and the pun intended, because Lyme is highly curable if treated immediately. And I'm really happy to know now that pharmacists in Ontario can prescribe antibiotics. So you don't have to go through this begging and groveling like I did with the medical system. You can just go and say, I've had a tick, and bang, you've got your antibiotics. I was 13 months from infection to diagnosis. And now I've got chronic Lyme. But it is not all doom and gloom. Apparently the ticks, I know there's some uncertainty about this, but they need more than 24 hours attached to transmit. There was a Lyme vaccine called Lymerix, which was discontinued in 2002, mostly thanks to the anti-vaxxers of the day. And quite frankly, there probably wasn't quite the market for it, and sadly there is now. But I know there is a new vaccine in development. In fact, a friend of mine is part of the blind study beta testing on it. And I know there are better, new, more definitive blood tests. I won't get into all that. It's in my book about how lousy the blood tests are. So that's a very quick snapshot of my book. Obviously, a lot more details in it and a lot of resources. If you do have a friend that you're trying to drag into your burning passion and they're resisting, my book might help you win the argument. Where to buy it? You can buy it online from the publisher, Hancock House, or Amazon, or Indigo. Around my area, it's in a number of stores. Urban Nature's got 8 stores across the GTA, from St. Catharines to Kingston, and they're all carrying it. And I think I'm most proud that it's in the visitor center at Algonquin and Point Pelee and at Birds Canada at Long Point. So when I see it, I talked about imposter syndrome. When I see it on shelves, with Roger Tory Peterson and here David Allen Sibley, it's really surreal to me. It's very humbling. So, if anybody has any questions, my email address is robertcbell and then the number 5@gmail.com. I'm quite active on social media. All my handles are the Birder Bob. So you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram. And just, one last thing, I love this picture of the saw-whet owl looking very proud of the vole that he or she is holding. So birding is really a hobby that really dwells in the joy of being in the moment, living in the moment. and sharing that with these amazing creatures, beautiful creatures, and getting your mind off your worries. And you know, you learn to value them. And it really is the gateway to environmental awareness. And like I've already said, if you care about them, you care about the planet. You know, and as I've already said, it's great therapy and free, but of course, if the birds start charging us, all bets are off. You know, so in conclusion, for me, birding is really leads to serenity, which helps to cope with my chronic pain and illness. And the last couple of sentences I wrote in my book are: life is a journey, and it is incumbent on us to make the best of it. I hope my journey might inspire some folks suffering with a chronic illness to get out of the limelight and into the sunlight, where the singing birds will warm your heart and lift your spirits. So I wish you all good birding and good health, and thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen. There.
Thanks very much, Bob. Just give me a second here to put a pin on myself too, and we'll get to some questions. So that was a fantastic, and I really loved all your photos with the talk you gave. I think it was a good choice to show photos of birds and not photos of ticks all the way through. There was some beautiful stuff there. Now, I'm going to look at the chat. If you've got questions, put them in the chat. But at this time, if somebody wants to raise a hand, I think somewhere you can find, or a little under reactions, you can raise a hand and you can unmute and ask your question in person as well. But let's see, I know, I think, Bill, are you there? You had a lot of contributions in the chat. I think you had your own experience with Lyme, did you, Bill?
I did indeed.
Let me find you, and I'll put a spotlight on you for a second. Just a second.
Okay, may I go?
No, I'm still fumbling. Just a second here. Okay, I found you.
Okay.
And I'll highlight you. Okay, there you go.
Okay. I lived in Germany. Germany recognized Lyme disease. My problem was I never had a tick. I never had a bullseye. I was in an active outdoor group running, and we did tick checks, and I never had ticks on me. In 1998, I came down with something very unusual for me. I had cold feet. If I lay down to go to bed, my feet were cold instantly. And I told the doctor this was unusual. I had physical checkups every 2 years. And in 2004, the doctor couldn't handle me, but his assistant could. And he said, well, I don't know. It's unusual. You have cold feet. I'll send you to a neurologist. And my shock treatment from the head to the toe was 15 meters per second, not the normal 50 meters per second. He said, we'll send you to the university clinic in Bonn, Germany. They will find something wrong with you. Don't worry. They always find something wrong. And that was at early April 2004. But the diagnostic didn't come through until June 2004. That was communications within the university. And then I decided I will take the treatment, and it was a 2-component antibiotic. I can look it up and pass it on to Robert if you want. This is 2004, prescribed for Lyme's disease. I got it intravenously every 24 hours for 21 days. A couple of months after that, I was tested. I had antibodies for it. But on the other hand, I am not sure whether A, my problems were Lyme disease, but that was just what they found, or B, I'm cured after having all the antibiotics. I mean, it is something like 6 years after the first symptoms, if those symptoms are related to the diagnostic I had Lyme's disease. Now, I wrote in the chat that I knew 5 other people. They all had different symptoms. Only one, the man, the couple had the bullseye. All the others had many different treatments, symptoms. One was a mid-20s school teacher whose school department transferred her to another town, another city, and another general practitioner. He said, "You are far too young to have, I think, what was it, arthritis as the cause of your pain?" And he did blood tests on her. And as I say, in Germany, it's recognized. It costs only $10 extra to have your blood sample from one of your fingers tested for Lyme's disease. It's a trivial, medically speaking and diagnostically speaking, trivial test. And she came up with, or the practitioner came up with Lyme's disease. So she was treated, not, it was arthritis, that she was treated for Lyme's disease, not for arthritis, simply because the doctor didn't think she could have arthritis at 24, 25. And so my conclusion from my own personal studies of these 6 people is Lyme disease, as you pointed out so clearly in your beginning, has so many different symptoms, and each one of us reacts in a personal way. It's just been a pain here in Canada to find that it's not recognized when Lyme is a town, village in northeastern United States. It's been known for, more than a century. I mean, come on, let's get the medicine out of politics and get OHIP covering this stuff. Okay, fine, thank you.
Any comments, Bob?
Everybody's got the same story. You hear it over and over. It's the same thing. Frustration. Yeah, so I think we've got Raging Bill to go with Raging Bob.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for that, Bill. And there's a couple of questions here sort of related to technical stuff. Somebody wants to know what binoculars and camera you're using, your equipment.
See Mike on the
I'm embarrassed to say I don't really carry binoculars anymore because of the arthritis in my neck. Even with I've got a holster to carry binoculars and camera. It's just too much. So I only carry a camera. I bird with a camera, and it's a Nikon Coolpix P1000. So it's got a very good zoom. But it's sort of like what they call a bridge camera between a point and shoot and a real camera. It's just one fixed lens. You can't change the lens.
Yeah, you're getting some great shots with that. I know I've lately taken to carrying 2 cameras and binoculars around my neck, but I look ridiculous, but that I don't mind. A very inspiring personal story. Carolyn says that, where's Carolyn's comment? Carolyn says she has pain syndrome. When she's out of nature with her beagles and cameras, she doesn't notice the pain so much. And I think a lot of us, as we get on, we all have aches and pains, and we find getting out in there in nature helps us cope with it, just like you. Any other questions coming in?
Susan?
Carolyn also put a sheet in the chat. People want to have a look at something about what to do when you see a tick, all the instructions. It's in the chat there, Carolyn. People can have a look for it.
Okay. Ken, before I forget, are you able to copy the chat line into a text and save it and send to me?
Yes, I can do that. Yeah.
I appreciate that because I can't multitask and read it.
Yeah.
Read it
And
now.
Bob Codd has a question. I'll put it on you, Bob.
It's not so much a question as just a comment. I was just blown away by your wonderful photos. They're just magnificent shots there. And I tell you, I've been taking bird photos for quite a while, and I'm green with envy. Wonderful photos there. The other thing I wanted to say was I have a chronic illness too, but it's nothing like Lyme. It's called aging. And It's slowing me down. There's no cure for this, apparently. But
No.
I find birding, I've often said I go birding for the good of my health, and my theory is keep moving or die. So I'm going to keep moving and keep birding until I can. So
Have you tried single malt scotch? I find that helps sometimes, Bob.
yes, unfortunately, that doesn't agree with me.
Okay.
Aging isn't for the faint of heart.
Well, I think Susan up there is let's Susan, unmute yourself and you can ask a question.
Well, I don't have a question. I wanted to just tell you about my experience with ticks. We have an island and we were heavily infested with ticks. And I tried various cures to get rid of them and ended up getting chickens. And that apparently is what they do in southern states, is they had kept chickens that because they like to eat ticks. And so it has gone down. But one incident that I had was it looked as if someone had taken a bright red lipstick and stuck it all over the floor, like as if they were pushing it onto the floor. And later I found a squashed tick that was engorged. I had a little dog then, and that's how I originally noticed that we had this problem, although everybody else was complaining in the family about getting ticks. Anyways, it turns out what they do, and you may all know this, is that they take the blood from the host and return the plasma, the liquid, and keep only the red blood cells. And that's what was in the engorged part of its body. And so when it got stepped on and that person was walking, they were making this, pattern on the floor with this squish tick, which I thought was interesting. So there, I just want to let you know. And I have had 20 years ago, I had bullseye noticed by a vet when I was playing volleyball. And he said you should get them checked, and I didn't get them checked. And so far I'm alive and kicking. So anyways, I just wanted to share that little interesting thing. I kind of had firsthand. I've had them on the end of my fork, believe it or not. When I'm eating, there's been one sitting on my fork. That's that you were infected with them.
And Susan, I think it's you have the rattlesnakes out at your place too, don't you?
Well, I haven't seen one in years. And we used to have a huge fox snake about 5 feet long, and then it got killed on the road. So I don't know what it was doing off the island. It was crossing the Honey Harbor Road, and that's where
Oh, well.
a lot of, and water snakes have diminished considerably. Yeah. Anyways, but I don't know how the ticks came to be on the island, but people said the raccoons may have brought them.
They're birds.
Yeah, maybe birds too, eh? But I don't know whether they were black. Like I kept some and I thought, I can't be bothered. I mean, I know it's a dreadful disease and I know people who have had it. And it's nice to know that you can get, the pharmacy will give you the stuff. And I certainly will take advantage of that in the future if I ever find a tick again or whatever. But thank you very much for letting me share that.
Thanks, Susan. And question here from Ron. I think it's sort of related to some of the resources, bird resources. He's saying, what resource did you use to identify the birds? Maybe, what field guides you're using or other resources?
Cornell Lab of Ornithology online really became my, all about birds. Their website was really my go-to source. And I also use, I've got to look it up here now, an app on my phone called iBird Pro. And when I bought it, it was like $25, and it's amazing. I think now it's a subscription app rather than an outright purchase. But iBird Pro is like having a full bird field guide on your phone, so it's great. And of course, Merlin now is a total game changer.
You want to, maybe some people might not know what Merlin is. A lot of us birders feel it has its strengths and its weaknesses still, but
yeah. So Merlin is an app that Cornell devised. It's free. You download it to your phone. Historically, up until the last couple of years, it was just photos. So you get a photo of a mystery bird, you put it in, it reads your location, and it reads the date, and knows your location. And then it churns away for a few seconds and it spits out typically 2 or 3 possibilities. And I think statistically, their first choice is usually 92 to 95% correct. So just based on your picture. But over the last couple of years, the game changer for me is Merlin has added a sound, like a Shazam for birds. And so with me losing my hearing, I go out now and I just hit record, and all of a sudden you'll see, song sparrow, little picture. You get a sonogram, and then you see blue jay singing cardinal, and the bird that sang most recently jumps to the top, and you end up with this long list. Now I find it's needs more improving yet, but it's fantastic. Now, for example, like even to my ear, a Carolina wren and a tufted titmouse can sound pretty similar in one song. And if I believe Merlin, this place is crawling with titmice, and it's not. They're Carolina wrens.
I would find, to me, the biggest
but it's
weakness,
really good.
To me, the biggest weakness is all of a sudden everybody are seeing Philadelphia or hearing Philadelphia vireos everywhere. And
I was
the
going to
tricky
use
thing
that
is
as my,
a red-eyed
use that
vireo
as my
can't
second
tell the
example,
difference
Ken.
between a Philadelphia and a red-eyed, but a Philadelphia vireo can tell the difference, but the red-eyed vireo can't. Anyways, Bob Codd, you have something to add.
We were talking about apps for the phone. If anybody's interested, Autobahn has a really good app for phone. It's free, and you can download it off the App Store or Google Play. That's all I wanted to say.
Now, Adrian Perry has noted, again, we're watching opossums as they crawl their way north. Opossums were originally a South American mammal, and they've managed to walk all through the states, and now they're coming into we've had a couple on Barry, and Adrian's over in Port Mendico, and she had one under her bird feeder for a few days, and apparently they're very good tick eaters. So we should encourage the opossums to keep making their way up here, I suppose. Well, anybody else got anything to say or add?
Well, I want to encourage people to put their answers into the chat. We don't have that many answers. There's more participants than we have answers. So we got a few minutes left, and Sue is diligently writing down guesses.
Yep. We'll give you, this is your 2-minute warning for the contest. And Bob will be sending out a copy of the book. You'll autograph it too, I assume, Bob?
Well, that's extra.
Pardon?
That's extra.
Oh, that's extra.
My pleasure. But I might not be mailing it tomorrow based on our forecast. I think we're to get 10 to 15 centimeters of snow tomorrow.
Yeah, I think this latest storm it might track. Some storms hit us off Lake Huron, and some storms seem to track along the lower Great Lakes. And I think you're probably going to get it worse than we do over the next couple of days.
Who's Ron's iPad?
Pardon?
Who's Ron's iPad? Somebody guessed, but all I get is Ron's iPad.
Yeah, make sure when you put your guess in, like Ron there, put your last name in so we know who Ron is, if it's not identified. Who are you, Ron? I think Ron's guess was fairly generous anyways.
Ron Lowe, I see. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to get an entry in?
Can I ask a quick question, Ken?
Sure. Who's that?
Pat File.
Pat File? Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for your very informative talk. It was most instructive to hear the symptoms and the progress that you had to go through. I had a friend whose 15-year-old daughter went through almost the same kind of story that you were telling me, and eventually they had to take her to the States and finally get diagnosed, and it took a while. And I remember there was the Green Party leader was taking on the Lyme issue about 10 years ago and trying to make it get a bit more federal attention to it. But just when you talked about snow, I heard on the radio the other day that ticks can live under the snow and that they're actually active, and that when this warmer weather comes about, they are there, that your pets, can get them.
Yep.
And I was wondering if you knew anything about that, and if pets bring them into your house, like, can they go from a pet to a person?
Yes.
I don't see why not. You know,
Yeah,
if your
they should.
dog has one on it, it could end up falling onto you. I think they can survive down to 2 or 3 below zero.
Okay, Bob, are we ready to now? Once Bob declares a winner, we're still going to, say thank you to Bob Bell. And we're still going to hang around a bit if anybody has any bird sightings they want to deal with, things like that. And I think Dorothy McCune wants to talk a little bit about monitoring bluebird boxes. She has quite a bit of experience in that, and Bob Codd's looking for some volunteers there. So if everybody's got their guess in, drum roll, and our contest judge is Susan Codd. She's going to declare a winner.
You got the total. Have you picked the winner?
Yeah. Well, so far as I know, unless I'm missing
Get
someone,
into the camera.
get into the camera. Is Rawlinson still on the chat with us, or?
Paul Rollinson, are you there? Let me see if I can find him.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. You're the winner
What did you
with
guess?
your guess was 2001.
Yeah, that's,
And
yeah,
there
that's
are-
right. Yeah.
As near as I can tell, there's about 1,825 birds in that photo.
Okay. Well, thanks. That's
I
Congratulations.
that was
Congratulations.
I
Paul,
gotta tell you,
it's pretty random.
it was a good guess.
Yeah.
well, good guess.
And Paul,
And I'll enjoy the book too. Yeah.
well, read it, and you can't sell this one, okay?
It's signed. I keep the signed ones. I can't.
Okay.
I didn't even
Well-
have to pay for the signature.
Paul is actually a renowned bookseller in our area, Mr. Bell. So
Oh.
Well, there you go. So Ken, if you can send me Paul's address, Paul, I'll pop it in the mail on Monday.
Great.
definitely we'll do that, yeah.
Super. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Cool.
folks,
Thanks
I'm
a
going
lot.
to sign off and let you finish your meeting. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you.
Okay.
was
good
great.
night.
Before you go, I want to personally thank you. Very inspiring talk. I just love that you hit on so many things that I love about birding, and yeah, you're right on the money. I loved it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bob.
Okay,
Bye.
goodbye.
Okay, Dorothy.
Sure. I've been doing the bluebird nest box watching in Barrie on the Oral Ski Trails Road for about 11 years, and I have to say I'm addicted to it. If you want to really understand what birds are up against to survive, you'll learn it intensively, and interesting too. You'll find I could tell the difference in personality. So sorry, we have probably 2 to 1 tree swallows to bluebirds, and house wrens have been increasing in numbers. So you really learn the personalities of the birds. I had a bluebird that would actually fly at me when we left it mealworms. And then when a merlin started hanging around my nest boxes, it went over to Robin Craig's boxes on old second line. And there were some tree swallows that would fly at me. And you try and do no harm, really, would be my credo, I should say. In that, it's best not to check them when they have the chicks, and you will lose chicks, and sometimes you will be the cause of losing chicks. You find what insects affect them, how weather will affect them, like cold. If we get a cold snap, around the May 2-4 weekend is when we usually start having bluebird chicks, and a cold snap can kill them all. So you really understand what birds are up against. And I remember, Don saw the merlin take down one of his tree swallows when it was fledging. So it's really an intensive learning experience, and I get addicted. Like Claire and Lane can tell you that usually once people have done a bluebird trail, they say, no, I don't want to give it up. I don't ever want to give it up. Because you really get quite attached to them. And the neighbors in the area will stop and ask what you're doing and help out. I had a young girl, it's hard to believe she's at university now, that would come and help me out. She would come and help me count. And you can, Don Scanlon has his grandchildren come and help him. I know Claire and Lane quite often get the high school kids to help make the next box liners and stuff. So anyway, I highly recommend it if you really want to know your bird, get to know what birds are up against. And I was going to say to the other Bob that you can almost predict if the bluebirds are here over the winter, then you know it's going to be a mild winter. Because when we get bluebirds on our Christmas bird count, it's a mild winter. Like it used to be like 10 years apart. Now it seems to be more consistent, but and they do seem to hang around places like Berry Hills Farms because of course they have the fruit. They have a wide variety of fruit. So I'll let it go at that. But yes, it's really quite a learning curve.
Dorothy,
And you'll get addicted.
Dorothy, do you think you'd like to explain the process of checking these bluebird boxes for us?
Sure. So usually they Robin Craig's birds usually show up. I always remember it because it's around my nephew's birthday. So usually around April 10th is when we start seeing them arrive. So we try and I mean, then they're, you know, and actually bluebirds, I think, mate for life. They usually, no, do they tend to mate with the same one? Anyway, and the tree swallows come a bit earlier. So usually, we're usually around April 10th. We try and get we clean out, I mean, because our boxes are well used by now, because they started, I think Phyllis started it. When was that, Phyllis? We've been doing it for, I think, probably 20 years. So we clean them out. And actually, when avian flu was around,
2010.
2010.
Yeah.
So, so Phyllis started them around Tangle Creek Golf Course when she was president, I believe. So yeah, we clean them out usually early April. And I just use water and paper towels. I mean, when avian flu was quite a danger a few summers ago, I would wear a mask when I was checking the birds sometimes. But, oh, and we make nest box liners. Now, Kate's been in touch with me, and Lane and Claire, I think, come back soon. But it's very easy to make the nest box liners. I just use is it 1 liter soy milk containers? If you just cut an inch off of those, they fit, like ours are 4 inches square. So we use those to put in the bottoms. Initially, you just need to really check about once a week because there's not much happening. So you record, you get to know, and there is probably a pamphlet on it. Okay, sorry. They have, I believe the ones that they put in for you have a little, what would you call it? A twisty, a latch.
No,
They used to have, they used to have.
They're actually screwed closed.
They're screwed closed, okay, so you
what
need to
gotta
carry
do?
your
You
screwdriver.
open them up with the birds already inside them? Doesn't that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So you open up the side of it, and the reason we have the nest box liners is so that if there is a nest, you can pull it out and check it without destroying the nest.
How often do you do this?
Initially, I would do it once a week until you're getting actual eggs. Because so you would count the number of eggs, count the number of chicks. And then once they are chicks, you know that, so usually once the eggs start being laid, it's about 2 weeks later you get chicks. And then 2 weeks later, once they're chicks, is when they're close to flying, close to fledging. And when they're getting close to fledging, you don't want to open the box because if they fly out before they're ready, it might be game over for the chicks. And the house wrens, you have to be very careful because they seem to have strong legs because they're ground birds, I guess, David? They have such strong legs that they'll jump out after a few days old. So you have to be, so either, I mean, you can put like a piece of plexiglass, like just from a picture frame. You can, and this is where Claire and Lane can tell you, they have a little, some people have a little, there's so many tools you can have these days. People even like put their phone up and take a picture and then look at the picture instead of disturbing the birds. And then, yeah, when it gets to there's eggs and chicks, you check every 3 days. Oh, and when there are chicks, and even sometimes before, we put mealworms, because mealworms will help the parents increase the survival rate of the chicks. Because, and one thing I learned is that if it's really wet, so there aren't a lot of caterpillars and bugs around, if the bluebird babies eat earthworms, it can kill them because it gives them diarrhea. So that's why I said you learn so much intensively of what these birds are up against just to survive.
Thanks very much, Dorothy. And like I say, Bob's looking for volunteers to monitor the bluebird boxes for MTM. We'll send out some messages about that. We'd like to get some people working on that. And I'm sure you'll find it fascinating. You'll learn a lot.
Can I correct you there, Ken? It's not for MTM. This whole thing started as a field naturalist project.
Field Nats project.
It happens to be on MTM land, and MTM is heavily involved in it. But it's one of our own projects, and that's why I really.
Okay, but on MTM properties or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Just David here. We have reached out to the students at the Elmville District High School just early this afternoon, and they are very excited about coming out to help again this year. And I've suggested to them that there's two components. One of them is actually crafting the nest box liners, and we're willing to go out and give some instruction on doing that. And then we've also given them the opportunity to come and participate with a cleaning project and installing new liners. And Bob mentioned to me that, as we clean those liners, it would be a really good educational idea, in that we can show them the different types of nests and identify the different types of birds that have been using the nests. I think they would find that very, very exciting. I got hooked on bluebirds, probably 3 or 4 years ago when I was monitoring grassland birds for the Couchiching Conservancy. And I started doing this for Nature Berry last summer. And I actually had the bluebird trail at Berry Hill Farms. And it's fascinating. Like, you get hooked on it very, very quickly. So I encourage anyone out there who, if you want a summer project, you want a fun project, and you enjoy birding, please volunteer. We need you.
Oh, actually, what I could say too is usually by July 1st, they're done. So if you're, so May 2-4 weekend, we start having chicks. End of June, usually you're done. There might be a second nesting, but very few. So pretty much after July 1st, it's done. Because they have to get big enough to be able to fly south.
Okay, with that, Bob, we've still got a few people on the meeting. Does anybody have any
sightings?
Nature sightings? Yeah.
248 blackbirds. They're 2,040. Sorry.
Somebody speaking up?
Yeah, just out on Tiny Marsh. I was there probably about 10 days ago, and I just went out specifically to look for birds. And I was really surprised. I think I saw my first snow geese in about 40 years. And it was just a small flock that flew overhead. And they didn't land on the marsh. They continued on their migration. A lot of tundra swans out there. Trumpeters, of course. We picked up a few ringneck ducks. And then you have your buffleheads and your common golden eyes and the odd merganser. So there was I'm sorry?
No geese?
No Canada geese?
Oh, well, Canada geese. I assume that there are. Yeah, there's lots of Canada geese. Okay. so many of them that you probably couldn't find a white-fronted goose if you wanted to.
Well, I might go with I'm gonna try sharing my screen to show some of my sightings. Let's see if this works here.
Oh yeah.
See if I can go full screen. Hey, there's what guy I saw yesterday. Whoops. Oh, it's running ahead of me. Well, it's a golden eagle I saw yesterday.
Wow.
Slideshow or something. And our little
Where?
Carolina wren has survived the winter. We had him on the Christmas bird count. Killdeer are back in the area. There was 3 at Rotary Park. And I think it was March 3rd, I had my first turtle
first
over in
turtle.
Collingwood. There's some of those tundra swans over in Tiny Marsh. I think most I caught was 400 or 500. The ducks are back. That's a lovely little bufflehead.
Beautiful.
And over in Collingwood, I had a harlequin duck, which was in nice breeding plumage.
Lovely.
And this was interesting. This is we figure this is a snow goose, Canada goose hybrid. And early in March, there were still some large flocks of snow buntings around. So that's me. I'm going to try to stop sharing.
Where was the golden eagle?
Beg your pardon?
Where was the eagle?
Okay, I'll tell you about that just a second. Let me see if I can pull him up again. That's the golden eagle. And actually, Bob could tell you half the story. Bob put an alert yesterday. There's a Eurasian green-winged teal. And I think Bob saw him in the morning. I went out to try to find him in the afternoon. We couldn't find him. But you can't always, I always say at birding, can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you get what you need. And we came around Upper Big Chute Road and we got this lovely golden eagle. So that's my story. I'm going to stop sharing.
Maybe you could let me share my screen then, Ken.
Well, I think as soon as I stop, you can.
Yeah, I'm waiting. Hurry up.
Okay,
Yeah.
and before you do that, I'm just going to mention a hermit thrush in Barrie.
Wow.
I
That
can't
was
figure out how
Monday.
to stop sharing. Let me see.
We can read your email.
Uh-oh. Okay, I'm done.
All right,
Okay, over to you, Bob.
let me fumble around for a moment here. What? I don't, that don't look like my stuff.
You're sharing your screen. We don't see anything yet.
Yeah, I tried to, but what came up isn't mine. Oh dear. Isn't this confusing? There we go. So there's one of your bluebirds.
Oh,
Yay. Oh, wow.
But this is a winter bluebird, right? Feeding on
Yep.
sumac,
That's right.
not feeding on mealworms.
It's
No,
bright
actually,
blue.
this was actually yesterday.
Where, Bob?
Oh, what I got the wrong thing showing here. I'm sorry. I told you I was going to fumble around. Oh my
Did that
goodness.
match us too?
Yes, it was. Here we go. I'll get to you in a minute. There,
wait.
there we go.
No,
So
we
this
still
is-
got the
this
same
is just
thing.
there we go. This is just a white-breasted nuthatch.
No, Bob, we don't have your screen yet. I think you gotta close out what that bluebird and get onto your other screen.
Ah,
Can you stop sharing and try again?
I apologize, everyone.
We did do this in dress rehearsal. We should have.
New share. There we go. How's that?
There we go.
Well, yeah, we've got, try
Oh,
to
the
click
bird.
on each photo and see if,
Okay, that's the black cap, or that's the white-breasted nuthatch.
well, we've got all, we're looking at all 10 photos.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I give up.
Okay.
I thought I had this figured out. Let me try one more time, please.
Okay, yeah, try, if at first you don't succeed, try again, but don't be a. No, we still got the folder, the whole folder.
Yeah. I can't figure it out. I apologize. I just can't. There was a photo I really wanted to show you and I'm unable to.
Well, we could put them up again. We can see them all. They're small, but you can tell us about them.
Why don't, let me try this first. All right.
Do you want me to call my grandnephew from down the street?
Is he busy?
There we go. Are you seeing
Yeah,
that?
there
Yeah,
he is.
there we
Yeah.
go.
There you are.
Yay. Okay, so I'll show you the nuthatch because I thought he was just so cute, just sitting there huddled against the coal. Black-capped chickadee. I took this photo because, you know, if you're a bird photographer, they're one of the most cooperative subjects you'll
Yeah.
ever find.
Sure.
I just love them. They're the sweetest little things. Everybody's seen trumpeter swans. This one's X32. That's that tiny marsh.
That's a tiny-
X32 and the X family. We got some sandhill cranes coming in, tiny marsh also.
Yep.
Oh, this might have been a Matchadash. Northern flicker. This was a couple of weeks ago down McKinnon Road. That was rare at the time. I don't know if they're supposedly back yet, but this one
There's
certainly was kind
not
enough
too
to
many,
post.
not too many around yet. I
Yeah.
don't think they've come to Midland-Penetang yet.
Well, I haven't seen one around here.
No.
There, of course, is another view of our wonderful blackbirds. This is a different view, different tree. But this is the prize. This is the Eurasian green-winged teal. Not the best photo, but we had a challenging time finding it in the first place, and the view we had was obstructed through sumacs. So what I did was I focused on a patch of open water and hoped and prayed that the bird swam into that patch of open water, and fortunately he did. So here you get a better look at him. You see the extra white markings along the stronger white pattern around the green patch on the face. But instead of an American green-winged teal has a vertical white stripe at the shoulder, this one has a white stripe and a black stripe below the wings on the flanks. So this makes him, this is what I understand is the 19th or perhaps the 20th record ever for Ontario. So it's quite a rare bird, although it's not a species unto itself. It's a subspecies of the green-winged teal, the other being the American bird.
Some people think the horizontal stripe makes him look fat, as vertical stripes are slimming. Horizontal stripes make him look bigger.
And as we were watching this bird, I had the distraction of having to try not to photograph these lovely bluebirds that were swarming around us eating sumac. And that's all I've got. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, anybody else have anything to
Figure out.
contribute before we say goodnight? Speak up now or forever hold your peace. Okay, I think that's about it. Say goodnight, Bob.
Good night, Bob. Thank you very much, Ken. I always appreciate your efforts putting this together.